Open your iPhone camera in photo mode. If you have a RAW icon here, press and hold the icon. A menu now pops up which allows you to easily select the photo format. For the highest quality photos, choose RAW Max. When you take a RAW photo, there will be far more image information, and this means you have more to work with when you edit the photo. And the downside is that each file will be much bigger. So if you don't have a RAW button, open Settings and go to Camera Settings and then to Formats. Toggle on the Pro RAW and Resolution switch. And now when you open the camera, you should see the RAW button, but it will be off by default. So when you want to take a RAW photo, you need to enable it first.
I got no food for you today, mate.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up your iPhone to create more compelling photos and videos. Plus I'm going to give you a few shortcuts to make things easier. So for this video, I'm using an iPhone 15 Pro. Now you might think this is a bit obvious, but it's amazing how many people forget to do this. Before you take any photos or videos, you should make sure that your cameras are grease-free. The thing is, our skin has this kind of natural oil, which keeps the skin healthy, but it's not so healthy for our photos and our videos. First, I'm going to show you 3 different shortcuts to quickly open your iPhone camera. I'll start with a tip for iPhone 15 users. Open Settings and search for Action button. Swipe until it says Camera and then just head out of the settings. Now long press the Action button to open the iPhone camera. And once it's open, you can then press the Action button again to take a picture or start recording. And if you're in photo mode, holding down the Action button starts a quick video recording. Here's another way to easily open the camera, and you don't need an iPhone 15 for this. Go to Settings, Accessibility, Touch, and then scroll all the way down to Back Tap. Choose Double Tap or Triple Tap and then choose Camera. I'm going to actually choose Double Tap for this. And now I can open my iPhone camera just by double tapping the back of the phone. So I tried this, and to be honest, I didn't find that this was the best way to open the camera. So then I just decided, instead of camera, I'll actually set this so that it captures a screen grab. That's something I do occasionally, so it's quite useful to have. But of course, to open your iPhone camera from the lock screen, all you have to do is long press the camera icon and release. Now, do you, like me, take more videos than photos? If so, let's make your life a bit easier. In Camera Settings, go to Preserve Settings. Now, toggle on Camera Mode. And when you open up your iPhone camera, it will be in the mode that you last used. Otherwise, it's going to keep defaulting back to photo mode. And that does really get annoying for video creators. So open Settings and go to Camera Settings. Now choose Record Video. At the top we have frame rate and resolution settings. Personally, I never shoot anything less than 4K with my iPhone. I also export and then upload all my videos to YouTube at 4K as well. Now, frame rates are not quite as straightforward as resolution. So I used to record everything in 24 frames per second, but these days I mostly use 30 and 60 frames per second. So I know that movies, they're still shot and they're played back at 24 frames per second. So if you really want to emulate old movies or even new movies, then choose 24 frames per second. Well, of course, switching to 24 frames per second won't suddenly make all your videos look like multi-million-dollar movies, because there's obviously many other factors involved, and mostly to do with lighting actually. But for everyday shots, or you don't have total control over lighting, I do find that 30 frames per second is more forgiving than 24 frames per second, and it just comes out a little bit smoother and a little bit more polished with less effort involved. Now I use 60 frames per second for slow motion. I know there's a slow motion mode on the iPhone, but that's going to cut your video down to 1080p. So if you use 4K and 60 frames per second, and then you can slow it to 30 frames per second when you're editing, or to 24 frames per second if you're going for that look. Make sure to have the check mark beside the settings combo that you use the most. because, this is what you're going to get when you open your camera app. So for me, like I say, this is 30 frames per second and 4K. So I'm not going to go too deeply into formats here, because actually they can get complicated, but this is the kind of thing that I explain more clearly in my book, Smartphone Videography Beginner to Advanced, and as well in my courses, which you can find on my Patreon website. And you don't actually need to subscribe to buy the book, as Patreon now has a shop section. Regardless of the iPhone camera settings we choose, we're not going to produce beautiful images without thinking about composition. Well, what is composition? Well, simply put, composition is the arrangement of elements within an image. Composition involves things like leading lines, and there's a weird thing called negative space. And there's a rule that's been kind of obsessing artists for hundreds of years. And that rule is called the rule of thirds. So if we want to employ the rule of thirds when framing and composing our images, then it's a good idea to switch on the grid. So let's do that now. Back in camera settings, about halfway down is a setting called grid. Toggle that on. Now open the camera app and you're going to see these 4 lines across the screen. And we can use these as guides when we're composing an image. But when we're capturing a photo or a video, by habit we tend to just stick the subject right in the middle. And this method does actually have an upside. And that is that the viewer knows exactly what they're supposed to be looking at. There's no confusion and there's no ambiguity. But the downside is that all our images do end up looking a bit similar, a little bit boring, and if we're honest, a little bit one-dimensional. But by placing important visual elements along the lines or at the intersections, we can start to break this habit of putting everything in the middle. And it also encourages us to think about where to place things. Whereas before we were just pointing and shooting, now we're framing and we're composing. Below grid, we also have a level meter. So toggle this on, and in the iPhone camera, you will get a level meter. And this is going to show you whether the camera is level with the horizon. So here's a photo that I took without the level meter. And here's one that I took with it. Wow, do you see any difference? No, neither do I. But after you've followed this video and you got yourself some photo masterpieces, there is a use for it. But there is one use for the level meter that is actually useful, and that's for doing overhead shots of food. Or actually of anything. It doesn't have to be food, but when you are photographing food from above, it's one of those things that if you get it off slightly, it just doesn't quite have the same impact. I do recommend using the level meter for this. And in fact, we used to get this just by turning on the grid, but now you need to have level enabled. So hold your iPhone over the food and you'll see these 2 crosses. Move the camera until you only have 1 cross. And now you're going to get that perfect overhead food shot. So, should we have HDR on or off? Well, you know what? If you don't want the hassle of even worrying about this, you can just turn it off and then skip this whole part. But what is this HDR switch? Well, if you have this enabled, video is going to be shot in 10-bit color in Dolby Vision. And Dolby Vision is a process which creates images where the whites are brighter and the shadows are more detailed. In other words, you get more dynamic range in the video. And you can see this as soon as you open up your iPhone's Photos app. Dolby Vision videos kind of brighten up when you open them, whereas regular videos don't. And they also have this HDR written in the corner. And everything is simple as long as you only view your videos on your iPhone. But if you want to upload a Dolby Vision video to a platform, or share a video, or edit a video, now things start to get a little bit more complicated. But to simplify things, here's 2 reasons to use Dolby Vision. So the first reason is that you want to shoot 10-bit color video, which gives you more to work with when color grading, just like shooting raw photos. When editing, you're going to need to use tools to convert the Dolby Vision to a Rec. 709 color space. And then you're going to need to export the video as a regular SDR video. SDR stands for Standard Dynamic Range. Now, the second reason is that you want to create and share video using Dolby Vision. So make sure to set your editing software to the correct color space and then export as an HDR video. And you can upload this HDR video to any supporting platform such as YouTube, and anyone watching your video, as long as they have an HDR supporting monitor, they're going to be able to view it in all its Dolby Vision extra dynamic range glory. When you're composing a frame, whether it's a photo or a video, think about creating depth in your image. Now, the most common way to take a photo of a landscape is to switch to the ultra-wide, hold the camera at eye level, and then click. But if we want to capture something more interesting, we need to work a little bit harder. When set designers create sets for theatre plays, it would be easy just to have this kind of flat background, wouldn't it? Just paint one flat surface and there you go, that's your set. But to create depth, they often place elements at the sides. And when you're composing your image, you can do the same. These side elements create a new frame, or what we might call a frame within a frame. And this helps to direct the viewer's eyes towards the center. Now place something interesting at the center, like a building or a person. And now you've added depth, and at the same time, you've created this interesting frame around the subject of the photo or video. Now, another way to add depth is to choose a low angle. In this video, I really had so much to work with. There's the puddle of water with the sprouts of grass, the leading line of the path, and the dramatic clouds in the sky. And when the subject walks into shot, which is, obviously it's me, we get this really nice reflection of the figure in the puddle. And this is why I love this little fold-up tripod by Joby, because it's really perfect for capturing these low-angle shots with an iPhone. And it just folds right up, really tiny. You put it in your pocket and you wouldn't even notice you had it. With your iPhone camera open, you can use the volume up and down buttons as shutter buttons or record buttons. Just press either of them. And if you do that, then you might want to hold your iPhone upside down so that the volume buttons are on the top. And it's not going to cause any problems. Your photos and videos are still going to come out the right way up. If you like shooting photos in bursts, then in camera settings, toggle on use volume up for burst. In photo mode, the left button is now your regular shutter, and the right button is your burst photo button. You can actually also shoot bursts just by dragging the shutter button to the corner, but I don't find it quite so comfortable. Anyway, just choose whichever feels most stable in your hands so that you get steadier shots. As well, if you press and hold the regular shutter button in photo mode, it starts recording a video. And then when you release the button, it stops recording. So it's a quick way to grab a video clip, but it's not going to be the highest quality video. So I wouldn't personally use that. In camera settings, go to formats. And these days, I would choose high efficiency here over compatibility. But if you want to shoot JPEGs rather than HEIF format photos, then just choose the latter. Enable ProRAW, and if you have a more recent iPhone, set the resolution to 48 megapixels. And this means that your main camera can now shoot 48 megapixel photos, of course. But if you want these 48 megapixel photos, but you don't want these much bigger RAW files, then just select the HEIF format at the top instead. Now, actually, there's two important things to remember here. The first thing is that you're going to need to enable it in the iPhone camera. So if you see that it's crossed out, which is the default, then it's not taking raw 48 megapixel photos. And second, obviously only the main camera, which has the 48 megapixel sensor, can shoot 48 megapixel photos. And when you switch to any of the other cameras, the ultra wide, the 2x, the 3x, the 5x telephoto, or the selfie camera, you're gonna get 12 megapixel photos. The button will still say RAW Max or HEIF Max, but Max is going to be 12 megapixels. As well, you cannot shoot live photos in the RAW format. So when you enable RAW, live is automatically going to be disabled,
and vice versa. Once we've switched it on in the settings, why do they bother us with this RAW button? And basically the reason is the size of the files, because they are much bigger, like 5 times bigger. And you don't really need that level of quality. If you're just taking casual photos, you're taking a picture of the cat or something, the RAW button here just makes it more convenient, so we don't have to keep going in and out of settings. Remember, the main reason to shoot RAW photos is if you're going to work on them in an app such as Lightroom, or even actually the photo app, which is in your iPhone, is a pretty powerful photo editor in its own right. So you might think, well, I don't have time for editing photos, so I'll just not bother with RAW. But editing can be as simple as going into the photo app and tapping this auto button, or using one of the preset filters in either Photos or something like Lightroom or another app. And with RAW, you're more likely to get better results, even with these simple, fast edits. What is the most common leading line that appears in literally trillions of images? I'm sure your iPhone already contains many of these kind of leading lines. Can you guess which ones I'm talking about here? Leading lines are a compositional technique where human-made or natural lines lead the viewer's eyes through an image to the subject or to the focal point of the image. They can be very obvious so that the viewer is probably going to be aware of them, or they can be like a subtle hint, and that's going to have more of a kind of unconscious effect. And just look around and you'll see all kinds of leading lines. There's vertical lines and there's horizontal lines. And of course, the most common horizontal line of all is the line that divides the earth from the sky, the horizon. Vertical lines can be things like lampposts and window panes or buildings and all kinds of stuff in human-made settings. Diagonal lines can come from a river, a road, or a path, for example. And going back to that low-angle shot I showed you earlier, we have the horizon and the path. And as well, the puddle of water even creates lines, all leading our eyes to this point here in the center. If we use the grid, we can place the horizontal line on the top line to emphasize the foreground. And when I move into frame, me and my reflection create this new vertical leading line. And it wasn't by accident that I stood there. I deliberately placed myself where me and my reflection is going to join with this intersection of leading lines. Of course, it did take me a few goes to get it right, but I think in the end it was worth it. So instead of switching to the lower quality ultra-wide camera to get a wider view, why not try using the pano mode instead? This way you're capturing as wide a view as you want, and also you're using the best quality camera with the best sensor. Tap the shutter, start panning, and then you just press it again to stop. So your iPhone automatically stitches all these frames together into one image. So the trick here is not to go too far, because if you do, then you're going to end up with an image that is, very wide and quite thin when you share it on social media, and it's kind of hard to view. But just a little subtle movement is going to create this extra width, and just use your eyes and decide how much you want to see. For photos, we usually want a fast shutter speed, because then we get everything sharp. And also no one in the photo has a blurry face because they move just as you press the shutter. However, sometimes we can actually use this blur for artistic effect. Your iPhone can create this effect without using a slow shutter. Take a photo where there's movement in the frame. Waterfalls, waves in the sea. So what you do is you just take a live photo, and that means that you cannot use the RAW format as we mentioned earlier. And then once you've taken the photo, open it in the Photos app and choose long exposure. Because a live photo is actually a short video clip, and the iPhone uses the frames from the video to generate a motion blur effect. And by the way, if you take a live photo and someone closed their eyes or something, so it's ruined the shot, you can actually choose a different frame, and hopefully you're going to find one with their eyes open. Just tap Edit and then Live Photo at the bottom, and then slide this little white rectangle until you find a good frame. Now, if you do enjoy long exposure photography, you might want to think about getting a dedicated app which allows you to actually set long shutter speeds so that you can really take these magical images. Generally speaking, each frame has two parts, the bright parts and the dark parts. So photographers and filmmakers call these parts the highlights and the shadows. Professional photos and videos are often well exposed for the highlights, which means that the highlights are perfectly exposed, but the shadows might just look a little bit dark. But the iPhone does something different. Firstly, it tries to avoid these dark shadows, just in case they turn out to be faces of your friends and family. And this means that it exposes for the shadows instead of the highlights. And when you expose for the shadows, the highlights can end up being blown out. And so blown out highlights are a little bit like holes in your image. Imagine if you bought a beautiful painting and someone had cut holes in it. I don't think you would be happy, would you? And it's the same thing with a photo. If you want it to be beautiful, you don't want it to have holes in it. So by exposing for the highlights, we fill in those holes. And if you find the shadows are too dark, edit the image and then just boost the shadows a bit. And if you used RAW photo format or the Apple ProRes format for video, you're going to be able to recover even more details from those shadows. The simplest way to adjust exposure with your iPhone is to press and hold on the screen to lock exposure and focus. And then you just drag the slider until you remove as many blown out highlights as you can. But probably a better way is to tap the little triangle or swipe and open up these extra settings. Tap the plus/minus button and then use the EV slider to bring down exposure and remove those blown out highlights. And the thing is, doing it this way, the EV isn't going to reset every time you take a new picture or shoot a new video. Now, currently, the iPhone itself does not allow full manual control either for taking photos or videos. And by manual control, I mean being able to set ISO, shutter speed, focus, and white balance independently, and to set these settings really precisely. For example, to reduce the noise in the image as much as possible, you really want to bring down your ISO as low as possible. There are apps for video that allow this, such as Filmic Pro, which is a subscription app, and there's Blackmagic, which is free. But these apps don't actually allow you to take photos. One app that does allow you manual control for photos is Lightroom. So there's a free version of the app as well. And of course, there are various other apps which allow manual control for photos. But the great thing about Lightroom is that it also comes with these color grading features. And as well, it allows you to shoot in the DNG format, which is a lot like the RAW photos that you get in the newer iPhones. But this actually works with the older iPhones, which don't have the RAW photo option. So I've left the use of negative space in images until last because it's a little bit more advanced. Put simply, when we talk about negative space, we're talking about empty spaces within a frame. And this is a very interesting way of capturing images, both photos and videos. And it takes your work even further into the realms of art. An image without much negative space is going to be quite busy. And if you prefer your imagery to be minimalist, you might consider this kind of image to be cluttered. Negative space photography emphasizes not just the subject, but also the empty space around the subject. The viewer's eyes can't help but notice the large section of emptiness that surrounds and defines that figure. Negative space can turn something otherwise ordinary into something dramatic. Normally we might assume a dramatic image has to be from the top of a mountain or at the bottom of a spectacular waterfall. But actually, something as simple as a tree can look dramatic when we surround it with nothing. One very simple way to use negative space is to use a clear, featureless sky and then set the horizon very low, perhaps even below the bottom grid line. And now we can just try to add a small building and place it on that bottom right grid intersection. And from something that could otherwise be quite ordinary, we've turned it into something much more dramatic. And also it's going to stand out from an ordinary everyday photo.